Hello, everybody. I am Bob Plankers. I'm joined by, we'll just go counterclockwise here. Mike Foley, Miles Gray, and Ken Wernerberg. And we are here. This is vSphere Live. We're live answering questions. Oops, hey, clearly have not muted my browser there. Yeah, as you can see, errors sometimes happen. We're doing it live, so there's no fixing it in post. We'll do it all in one shot here. This month, we're doing it on a monthly basis. We're talking about containers and Kubernetes and this Tanzu thing. What is that? How does it help? All of that stuff. So Mike and Miles are our Kubernetes and Tanzu and container experts. Ken is color commentary and insightful wisdom. And I don't even know why I'm here. I'm here to ask dumb questions, basically, and so and get the party started. We've got people out in the live chat. If you put questions in the live chat, please put questions in the live chat. If you've got something that's been bugging you, if you want to know things, there are no dumb questions. Well, there probably are dumb questions. I'm going to ask the dumb questions. Your questions are better than mine. Put them out there. We'll answer them live as we go. So, what should we talk about first? How about we just start at the beginning? Containers. Miles, why would I use a container? I'm kind of an old school sysadmin kind of guy, and I just deploy a new VM and put an app in that. What does this container stuff buy me?
Oh boy, a whole lot, a whole lot. So it's not just like a new format or a new VM, right? It's not like just it's the new version or the new way of doing things. There's a whole bunch of like operational benefits, development benefits behind it, stuff that we probably just don't have time to get into today. Like it gets really, really deep really quickly. But the main things I would say are containers. I'd say there's maybe like 3 high-level points that are advantages of containers over VMs, but VMs still have their place as well. They're very good at really dense workloads and that kind of stuff. But for containers, the main driver was essentially, we've all heard the meme of works on my laptop, not my problem, right? So it's that essentially. It was designed to solve that problem. So a developer packages their application into a container on their laptop. They give it to another person on another system, in production, wherever. They can say unequivocally it will work. Like there is no differences because the container contains everything that application needs to run, right? So it's got the libraries in there, it's got all of its binaries, whatever. So number one is it packages everything together that you need to actually run the application, minus the OS. You don't need an OS. And as a result of that, it's much, much lighter weight because OSs come with a whole bunch of stuff that you don't need. And, by only including the stuff that you actually need for an application, generally that's a good thing. It makes them more secure as well because, the less stuff you have in your application, the less stuff there is to compromise. So it usually leads to more secure applications as well.
Well, that's actually a really good question. Something I was thinking about there was, anytime anytime you're bundling libraries and things like that and distributing those, then you have security implications. What if one of those libraries needs to get patched? Mike and I have done a lot of security stuff, and the idea of patching is really important. So are containers easy to update then? You said there's not an OS underneath them. They're fairly easy to update? How do you get a new version of something if there's a vulnerability?
So I guess this is like key advantage number 2 is that we all know how to manage VMs. You SSH into the VM, apt-get update, whatever. You install your packages on Microsoft. We all know how to do that. It's iterative. You do it piece by piece by piece. Mm-hmm. That means it's very inconsistent as well, I might add, because, people do things in different ways. People forget to install things.
Oh, humans? Are you kidding? We're perfect.
I know, right?
This was not about ripping on human beings. This was about talking about containers.
But even with like config management systems, say like Puppet or Ansible or whatever, you're only as resilient as the person that wrote that runbook, right? And they can always make mistakes,
Testing,
So
what's that?
testing, yeah, exactly.
Unit
Especially when
test.
it comes to that kind of stuff, people generally don't test it because it's hard to test.
Yeah. Well, yeah.
So when it comes to containers, containers are immutable, and what I mean by that is you can, but you should not and will not ever SSH into a container to upgrade a package, simply because they don't have a built-in package manager. Why would you package one if it's not part of your application? So because the container has everything the app needs to run, what that essentially means is if you want to, say, resolve a CVE, you package OpenSSL as part of your application, there's a CVE for OpenSSL, and you want a new version of that. Well, you could use something like Tanzu build packs, which we have, pre-validated images that are secure and are always patched against the latest. Or, your developers can build their own, which is totally cool as well. They package the new version of OpenSSL, they push it up to the registry, and then depending on what kind of system you're using, Kubernetes, for example, if you're using some kind of CI/CD pipeline, it'll probably just roll it out for you automatically. That's the other major thing is containers generally aren't interacted with on a one-to-one basis. It's really very pipeline driven, very automation driven.
What is CI/CD? Those are two acronyms that people might not be familiar with. Continuous integration and
continuous delivery or deployment. People swap them, but they mean the same thing essentially. Continuous integration is a different concept. We use them together. We say CI/CD, but they are two distinct processes. CI is developer writes code. They push code to Git repository. System automatically builds container, right? Runs tests on it, all that kind of stuff. That's CI, running testing, all that kind of stuff. CD is once it's built, what happens with that? And that's stuff like Argo CD or whatever, how it gets deployed, how it's rolled out into production. Is there like a staging cluster, that kind of stuff. So that's the two things. So one builds the app, the other deploys the app.
Interesting.
I think what makes up the app is also slightly different. And this is that concept around microservices that we've seen for a few years now too. Like what you put into an operating system, into a VM is different. I wouldn't say that it's better, worse, or anything along these lines, but it's definitely more flexible when you start talking about how you break apart that application in a containerized world, where you may be able to scale different portions of that application stack in different ways, according to the requirements, according to the workloads, according to whatever happens to come along. And that all goes into how you package, how you create, develop, and package that application set with those self-describing sort of fashions that Miles was talking about. So I say that there's another advantage to looking at containers if you're doing app development in terms of how you can scale the different portions of the services delivered by the applications.
Cool. Mike, do you have thoughts on containers?
Yeah, I mean, it's very easy to end up with VM sprawl, as we've seen in the past, where I have hundreds and hundreds of VMs. The same is true for containers. And that's really, if we want to segue into the bigger conversation of Kubernetes,
I do. In fact.
Kubernetes is there to manage the sprawl.
I would argue there's more sprawl with containers than with VMs because you get thousands of those things.
Yeah, it's so easy to just build a new container. And before you know it, you have either a bare metal box or a VM running a junk load of containers. And how are you managing compliance? How are you managing, patch management? And it just starts getting crazier and crazier and crazier. And I think that's where the folks who created Kubernetes looked and said, hey, we can probably solve this. And then Kubernetes comes in and says, okay, I'm going to allow you to create a prescriptive environment. So I need a hamburger with fries, ketchup, lettuce, tomato, onion, but no cheese.
Oh, that's nice.
And deliver me that. I don't care how you do it, just deliver me that. And it goes off and it grabs all of those pieces and delivers to you the working environment that makes up a hamburger, right?
And Kubernetes is very API driven too, correct?
Right.
Fully.
And that's a huge change for a lot of organizations. The idea that prescriptive nature that you're espousing here, that be prescriptive. We don't have to be the reactive. This whole thing sounds like kind of taking what we've been talking about for 30, 40 years in IT and actually doing it, being prescriptive, having APIs first, that sort of thing. Am I wrong in this? Or?
Well, you're wrong that we've been talking about it for 30 or 40 years in IT. Maybe you have, but I'm in my 20s.
I'm not that old. Yeah. But,
I think I'm in my 20s.
Yeah. But we've got some questions here. I want to pause for a second, and I'm going to be the YouTuber. If you're joining us, thank you. It's great to see folks out there. Click the like button. We like likes. It promotes us here. If you've got questions, we'll answer them live. We could probably start. We've got a couple. We've got at least one in here that we can do, and we're using a new platform here that I can actually promote a question into the video here. Yeah, I like this. Can vCenter HA is vCenter HA possible with WCP? So let's back up for a second. WCP is
Workload control plane.
Okay.
Which is not a product that we offer. It was an internal code name.
We refer to it that way sometimes. We've also called this thing Project Pacific when it was announced. We shipped it initially as vSphere with Kubernetes. What's its name now? What is this Tanzu thing then?
So it is now called vSphere with Tanzu, and that constitutes a couple of things. That's your supervisor cluster, which is this Kubernetes API layer that we have inside of vSphere now, and that lets you request things like Kubernetes clusters for your developers and VMs now. If you look at my VM service blog that I wrote last week.
Yep, we'll talk about that in a couple of minutes here, yeah.
So there's a whole bunch of different services that it offers. So vSphere with Tanzu is that supervisor cluster coupled with the services that go with that. So you've got your VM service, your TKG service, and more esoteric things like the data persistence platform from vSAN that lets you deploy Minio as a service, that kind of stuff. So
what do you mean? You need to store things in these containers?
Oh yeah, they're all stateless, and they all, if it dies, you spin up another one. You don't worry about state. No one cares about storage. No, this is one of the greatest fallacies of containers. Is people say containers are stateless. It doesn't matter. You don't need to worry about state in them. But the reality is they're the same 70-30 mix workloads that we've always seen. It's the exact same stuff because at the end of the day, the applications are the same. The applications haven't changed. What has changed is the delivery model. The I/O patterns are still very, very similar.
Gotcha.
It's interesting too. Something that Mike mentioned earlier was around compliance or an easier compliance when using orchestrators of containers and so forth. And I thought, that's interesting because, of course, when it comes to security and compliance, you don't need to worry about that anymore in a container space, right? I mean, all that's taken care of because there's no OS, so it's inherently secure, right, Bob and Mike? The two security guys kind of like,
yeah, I'm going to start twitching.
Container escape.
Container escape. Oh my goodness! But we're drifting here. Okay, so WCP. Let's get to the question. WCP, workload control plane. Just another term, Project Pacific, another term, vSphere with Kubernetes, another term for vSphere with Tanzu. And so is vCenter HA possible with WCP? I believe the answer is yes, right?
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, vSphere, vCenter HA is completely transparent to the things that are accessing the vCenter APIs. It makes no difference to us whether it's in HA mode or not HA mode. Yeah, it works.
Cool.
Yeah. So what's the interplay then between the vCenter layer, vSphere layer, and the Tanzu component then? How do those pieces fit together?
Yeah, there's a couple of aspects. I think the first one is that there's a UI integration, right? And that's the thing that most people see first. So whenever you log into vCenter as of 7.0, you would see this new workload management section. And that's where you manage all of your vSphere with Tanzu stuff. And that section is where you set up stuff like, deploying your supervisor cluster that we just talked about, setting up your namespaces for your developers, role-based access control, policy, storage, what have you. So that's one component. There's the vCenter UI side, the user interaction layer. The other bit is the supervisor cluster, and that is deployed as 3 VMs because it's a highly available control plane. They've got DRS anti-affinity rules applied to them so that they all stay separate. And that is there, and that manages all of your workloads. It manages all of your services that you're getting deployed through this. And they are discrete things. So you have vCenter on one hand, which is managing the infrastructure, and then you've got your supervisor cluster, which manages the workloads. But they are separate.
That's pretty cool. So the supervisor cluster, is that something? So that's managing. Is that managing all of the Tanzu and Kubernetes stuff, or is there another layer? Where does the Tanzu Kubernetes grid stuff fit into this? Is that a different type of cluster, or what is that?
So a Tanzu Kubernetes grid cluster, TKG or TKC, some people call them Tanzu Kubernetes clusters, is something that you deploy from a supervisor cluster. So the idea is you have like your Kate's team or your DevOps team. Generally, like we say in our literature, it's developers, but generally it's not developers who write Java code. It's, there's a platform team that looks after Kubernetes, and they would spin up Kubernetes clusters on behalf of other teams, right? Generally, that's how you see it done, or even VI admins, because to be frank, it's really, really trivial to do this nowadays. Like sorry, go ahead.
No, I was gonna say, yeah, that's that's part of this whole deal, right? Is, vSphere with Kubernetes, vSphere with Tanzu. One of the big things is that it's easy to do this. Please continue.
Yeah, so I've been playing with Kubernetes since, I don't know, maybe 2.5, maybe a bit longer years ago now.
Oh.
Yeah, since I was 2.5. Yeah, I invented it. I've been playing with it for
a lot longer than people think, though.
Yeah, I think 2016 was when it came out originally. Or it was the first alpha versions, but and it was originally written in Java. Fun trivia fact
really?
there, not Go. Yeah. I've been playing with it for a couple of years and seeing the evolution, and also having to set up my own Kubernetes clusters before we had Tanzu. I cannot tell you how painful that is. It is a truly difficult, horrific experience. And it's not just the initial setup. Like once you get the setup down, you think, all right, cool, I got it, no problem. I have my run book, I can get it spun up. Then you come to do an upgrade and you realize a whole bunch of the APIs have changed because, this is a fast evolving space. They change the APIs all the time. You got to go relearn a bunch of stuff, and you can do it, but you have to do it every single time there's a release, and there's a release every 3 months. So it's not fun. So having an offering that just goes, hey, you know what? Could I have 3 control plane nodes and 4 workers, and could you make them like extra large and, just make that a thing? And it does.
That's huge.
Killer. Yeah.
Yeah. No, that's really cool. Because, I was back before I joined VMware, a few years ago now, we were looking at Kubernetes. People wanted to do that stuff. And just what you're describing just really struck a nerve for me, because that's exactly what we were talking about. And this stuff hadn't been made easy yet by Tanzu and stuff. So,
and I think that's another huge part of what we were doing with vSphere, Tanzu, and the various different tool sets that we're wrapping around that. A lot of people who are very familiar with the vSphere environments that they've been working on for 20 years, in some cases, they hear containers and they think, oh God, now I've got to learn Golang or Java. Mm-hmm. Or, wow, I have to learn all of these APIs that I've never looked at before, and this is all confusing. It sounds like I now have to be a programmer in order to use containers.
Yeah, you start looking at how long you have until retirement, and can I squeak out that way, So
this is the second iteration of write once, run anywhere, by the way, because we had that with Java originally, remember? And now we're saying it again with containers. But the difference is it's actually real this time. It's not just a fallacy.
Yeah. But anyway, I think that is the whole point, is that this is now bridging that gap and making orchestration of containers easy for a VI admin, because it's using those interfaces that they're familiar with. Yeah. If you want to use, what's the consensus? Kubectl?
Oh,
kubectl.
You're going to start a religious war in the middle of our live stream here. Mm-hmm. Thanks a lot, dude. So I hear VI is the best editor ever, and macOS stinks and Windows rules, or something like that. Do we have any other religious? Which?
Tabs.
We need a GIF.
Another question.
How to pronounce all of these things.
Hey, let's do another question here. How and where does VMware vSphere fit into the AWS ecosystem? Mike?
That sounds like a great question for Ken.
It does.
So part of what we've been doing for the last 5 years is really this migration towards hybrid cloud models in general. we've seen these iterations where public cloud come out and everyone says, oh, everything's going to move to public cloud. And then people said, no, I've got data issues. I need to make sure that my data resides locally. Yeah, I'd love to be able to do some burst out in cloud. I'd love to be able to migrate half of my environment to the cloud. I'd like to be able to do dev there, whatever it happens to be. And I think this hybrid model is now really the one that's maturing the most quickly, let's just say. So we've been working with Amazon for a few years now on the VMware Cloud on AWS, and that's just one of the multi-clouds that we work with. Multi-clouds, that is one of the clouds in the multi-cloud hybrid cloud models that we're working with. So I think the idea that VMware and vSphere fits in with the AWS ecosystem is a little bit broader than we could probably tackle here, because of course there are all sorts of functions and things that Amazon provides that we can integrate with. But the way we're trying to make that hybrid model and that hybrid journey easier is by, first of all, layering in a vSphere environment on top of AWS, and that's VMC on AWS. The benefit there is that all these things that we talked about today, VCHA, vSphere Tanzu, at some point, all of the pieces that we build will be 100% compliant and compatible, irrespective of where they are running on-prem, running in VMC on AWS, running on Google, running on Azure. We have these development efforts in place to make sure that VMware layer that is ubiquitous, first of all, and homogeneous, second of all. So you want to deploy a container on vSphere Tanzu, it can run in any of these environments. You want it to take advantage of some Amazon functionality, it can do that either natively or through the VMware layer. You want to straddle half of your applications run on-prem and half on Amazon? Absolutely not a problem. You don't need to refactor or reconfigure anything in order to do it. So I'd say this is really the genuine delivery model of all of these efforts that we're talking about in terms of what we're building. How do we turn VMware and all of the services that we're layering on top of that into something that can deploy and run in a consistent fashion across any of these different cloud models or cloud delivery mechanisms? And I'll stop there because otherwise.
Well, Miles.
Yeah, I think one of the biggest takeaways from running your vSphere environment in AWS and running your vSphere environment locally and running it in other cloud vendors that are doing the VMware cloud way is you don't have to refactor everything when you want to move an application to the cloud. I don't have to take for example, a Windows VM and essentially completely reinstall it or install new drivers or do a P2V or any of that sort of stuff. You will see, I just recorded a video earlier today with our colleague Niels, where we did a new advanced cross-center vMotion between his lab and my lab. And we came up with the idea of doing that like 5 minutes before we recorded the video. And it was so simple and so easy to do that it puts that whole workload of I need to refactor just off the plate. Now I get to focus on, okay, where's the best place to run this? And the same will be true for containers and so forth.
Well, Miles, you were talking about write once, run anywhere, right? This is just all subtopics in that category, as far as I can see. And and Mike, you talking about this stuff reminded me of DR too. The idea that it's not just if you want to run workloads somewhere else. Maybe you end up having to run workloads somewhere else. And the ability to quickly deploy this stuff without having to P2V, change drivers, all of that stuff is killer for business continuity and disaster recovery and all of that sort of thing. How do you keep your application up and running if you lose a data center or if you lose an availability zone or whatever? Cool. Well, let's see, what other questions do we have out here? Will Salt Stack SecOps ever be used for compliance remediation on Tanzu?
I already tackled that. There are no security issues.
Yeah, there are no compliance issues. These are not the compliance things you're looking for. But if you are subject to regulatory regulatory guidance and regulatory requirements. One, I'm sorry, and I have a deep appreciation for the state that you live in. That's actually kind of how I ended up being here. But yes, the answer is we're definitely doing more with the Salt Stack stuff. Salt Stack being the company that we purchased about a year ago now or something like that. And integrating that more deeply into the vRealize suite of products, one, and then two, using that to drive a lot of stuff forward, and especially in environments that are all API driven, that's awesome. We can actually do a lot of the compliance checks and security checks and that proactively. There's a lot of conversations going on with that, so stay tuned. Let's see. Just enabled Tanzu on a small cluster and loving it. Well, good. Thank you. What are good resources to get my traditional developers started on containers?
Oh boy.
I am adding some links to the chat.
Excellent.
Yeah, I got a bunch of stuff as well. So if you're approaching developers about this, and my folks run a small business and they've got developers internally and stuff as well, and they're looking at this now because they've heard me talk about this crap for the last 2.5, 3 years. They're like, maybe we should do something about that, which is probably, I can imagine, the angle that you're coming at it from. You hear a lot of this going on and you're like, maybe we should look at this. Whenever it comes to like traditional developers, there's a few things that you need to be like cognizant of. One, they like doing things the way they've always done things, like, the rest of us. We don't like change as much as anybody else. But at the same time, what the best way to do it is to highlight the benefits for them, like when it comes to testing stuff and deploying stuff, and how few headaches there are whenever you start modernizing your app. And this is kind of flying in the face of like what you guys were just talking about, where you just lift and shift stuff. This is refactor territory, or right from scratch territory. And with that in mind, like there's a whole bunch of paradigms around this. So there's this thing called the 12-factor app. And if you adhere to all of these paradigms of this 12-factor app, that is essentially like a set of design rules for your application that would make it cloud native, right? And if your developers build software that adheres to the specification, then they'll be on a good path to go down that kind of route, to start with containerization and whatnot. I think the best way to start, though, is if you have like a small web app or something in your business, the best way to get started is that's stateless. They're really, really easy to containerize and really easy to roll out. Just look up Containers 101 on Google search, and you'll see that the top video result is from ourselves about 3 or 4 years ago now. And it's just called Containers 101. It's on the VMware Cloud Native Apps YouTube. And that will take you through, what is a container? What goes into a container? How do I build one? This kind of stuff. And just, get your developers started. If they have one of these small web apps or something simple, containerize it, get them to send it to someone else that also has Docker on their system, see that it just works, right? And immediately they'll start to see, as they add more and more dependencies and more complexities into the container, how much easier that makes their distribution and upgrades and things like that. So I think it's more of a medium-term to long-term thing that you need to keep going with your developers, that you need to re-educate them and just say, look, this is really the strategy that we should be looking at. Demo some of the big applications that you can deploy on Kubernetes. For example, GitLab is a killer one. With one line of code, I can deploy an entire highly redundant, highly available GitLab instance, which is a massively complex app. There's no way you could do that without this kind of framework, right? So just give them a bit of justification, say, look, we're not this company, but this is the kind of direction we could go in, and start them off with some easy. There's a lot of really good Container 101 courses out there, and definitely check out 12-factor apps as well.
And one thing I might add, just like with any new technology, don't try to apply the rules of the older technology to the newer technology, because then you're not going to reap the return on your investment in time and energy. That's like, for example, trying to treat a VM as a physical device never really worked, because the underlying infrastructure was different. You're competing for resources. And with containers, don't don't expect a container to live forever. A container uptime of 4 years means you're doing it wrong. Just like the host uptime of 4 years means you're doing it wrong. So yeah, take an open mind.
Let me shift this back to a VI admin perspective rather than the developer perspective. When what does it look like? What does a container look like when it's running on a vSphere environment? What do I, as a vSphere admin, look at and see and go, oh my God, what is this thing? And do I need to wipe it out? Do I need to worry about it? Do I need to
kill it with fire?
Demotion it somewhere? Kill it with fire?
Nuke it from orbit. What other?
Right.
Because I think there are two elements here. Obviously, in fact, I'd say there are probably three different factors that you need to take into account in order for this to be successful. First of all, the developers need to be in this. Oh God, help me, paradigm. They need to have this mindset that this is the way they're going to start developing because of all the benefits we talked about. There's a DevOps perspective, which says, hey, I've got all of these requests that are coming in for infrastructure that I don't particularly care what type of code it is, and I don't particularly care what kind of infrastructure it is, but it needs to be married up and it needs to be seamless. But then there's also the traditional VI admin, and I think it's actually easier for the former to come around to deploying on Tanzu because they don't care. It's totally abstract to them in terms of what these resources are. But from a VI admin perspective, I think it could be somewhat scary to see, wait a minute, I've got these abstractions running on vSphere now, and I have no idea what's within them. And when I start poking at it, it looks scary.
Yeah.
So,
well, what if I get asked about them?
Yeah.
What if one of my security people show up and say, we got a problem. How do I deal with them?
What's the
Mike,
network path for this particular application set that's running in this container? So what does that look like from a vSphere perspective, I guess?
Mike looked like he was looking for something there. Mike.
No, I haven't found it yet. So.
Oh, okay.
How
Cool.
stable is this world for a VI admin, I guess, is what. And to me, it's not. But,
so I just dropped some links in the chat there for 12-factor apps. If you want to have a look at that or throw that at your developers, they can see from, and honestly, that's a developer-centric resource. It probably not mean a whole lot to anyone on this call that's a VI admin, but it will make sense to them and it will get them on the path they need to be on while you're on the path that you need to be on for learning these new tools as well.
Cool. That's excellent. Let's see. What else do we have in here? How about backup and restore of supervisor cluster and guest TKC cluster in vSphere with Tanzu when we have VCD and NSXT integrated? Valero is mentioned in GitHub, but not in detail about the support. Miles, I hope this means something to you because this I'm lost here. Do you have an answer?
It does.
We were actually just talking about this today.
Yeah. There's a lot of words there, but yeah, there's a couple of things. So yes, you can, and actually, do you know what? This is a great opportunity to talk about. Can I just back up Kubernetes clusters and restore them? The answer is absolutely not. And I'm not even joking. You cannot just take a hard backup of a Kubernetes cluster and restore it and expect it to work. It will not work. And the reason is it uses etcd as its backing store for all of its state, right? So whenever you deploy an application to Kubernetes, you state stuff like, I want there to be 3 replicas of this. I want it to run this container image or whatever. Not only do you need the persistent volumes, so the volumes that actually store data for, say, your Cassandra instance or whatever it is, but you need those manifests because if you think about it, if you restore those Kubernetes nodes, right? And they've got the disks and everything attached to them, but it doesn't know there was 3 instances of this. It thinks there was just 1, for example. Your data is gone, right? It's no good. So you need an application that backs up not only the data, the actual persistent volumes, but the Kubernetes state as well. And that's what this Valero tool that's mentioned here does. So it backs up the current state of the cluster, so how the app is deployed, how many replicas, all the assets, secrets, all the other stuff that goes around it, config maps, but also the data as well. Now, when it comes to backup and restore of a supervisor cluster and a guest TKC cluster, this is a TKG cluster that you get deployed from a supervisor. There are a couple of aspects. So number one, your entire workload management setup is backed up as part of your vCenter backups. So if you haven't thought vCenter backups are important up until this point, they sure are important now. So you want to make sure that you have that backed up, right? That's step number one. So if you go to restore, that'll restore workload management and your configuration for workload management. So your HA proxy settings, your load balancer settings, your supervisor cluster settings, all that kind of stuff. The second bit is, and because they've mentioned here that they use NSXT, you would use a tool like Valero, or very specifically, you would use Valero. You get that installed into your supervisor cluster, and that lets you back up your supervisor cluster state. So that includes the persistent volumes, all the manifests. And because we know the supervisor cluster deploys other Kubernetes clusters, it backs up those as well. So whenever you do a Valero backup of your supervisor, you're capturing, okay, I had XYZ namespaces, and I had 2 Kubernetes clusters in one and one in another, and they're at these versions. So whenever you restore that, that will create those clusters again for you. And there's a third level. So there's like 3 levels of backup when it comes to this. So there's the VC backup, which is the workload management state. There is the supervisor cluster backup, which is the workloads that were deployed from the supervisor cluster, including vSphere pods, VMs, TKG clusters. And then the third level is inside the TKG clusters themselves. You can use whatever application that you want to back up your Kubernetes apps. Obviously, we distribute Valero. It makes sense to use Valero, but if you want to use a third-party offering, cool, you can do that too. And that's what backs up your actual applications. And the reason for the delineation there is generally we find that application developers and teams that run these platforms want to run their own backup systems. And the reason is, like I said at the start, when you're using CI and CD to do this stuff, CD systems will deploy as soon as a new version is ready, right? They're not waiting around for change windows or anything like that. It just goes straight out into the system. So what you want it to do is anytime it does that, and I was talking to one of the guys from Veeam earlier on today, and they have a feature that does this, but it works with Valero as well, where anytime there is a deployment through your CD pipeline, before it does the deployment, it takes a backup. So no matter what happens, you can always roll it back, and that includes the data as well as the manifest. So it is totally supported. It does work today. And like I said, 3 levels. So VC backups, important. They restore your workload management system. Supervisor cluster, you back that up with Valero. That will get the state of all of your TKG clusters back. And then you have your individual backups for each TKG cluster with Valero or Kasten or whatever tool you choose to use.
Yeah, it's hard to understate hard to overstate the importance of backing up vCenter server nowadays. The Tanzu stuff, the vSphere Tanzu things that you're mentioning, some of the new features that have come out in vSphere 7 as well, really very vCenter servers centric, and that backup is very important to be doing one, and then to also be storing securely too. So. Let's see, what other questions do we have here? Let's pick on Mike for a second. Mike, would you recommend studying for the Certified Kubernetes Admin exam on vSphere with Tanzu? Oh, you're muted, dude.
You're muted.
It's on my list of things to do.
Excellent. Yeah, me too. So, Miles, do you have any thoughts on this? Ken?
It is a great primer, honestly. I haven't sat it myself, but whenever they introduced this course, I was already about 1.5 years down the path of learning Kubernetes, and there wasn't a whole lot else for me to hit my head against the wall over. But yeah, like if you want the easy path to get, the Kubernetes lingo, understand how things work, because vSphere with Tanzu is Kubernetes, any generic Kubernetes certification will help you understand that system.
That's a really interesting point there too. So vSphere with Tanzu is full normal Kubernetes. It's not some special variant of ours, or
well, kind of, and also not. So supervisor cluster is opinionated, but that's because we use it to deploy services, right? So we have to have some opinionation there.
So it's not quite the same as the open source stuff.
Right. Excuse me, my dogs have attitudes.
They're also opinionated, yeah.
They are also opinionated, yeah. The other thing is TKG clusters that you do deploy from this, they are vanilla Kubernetes. They are fully compliant, and that is extremely important whenever you're choosing a distribution, that you choose one that is vanilla compliant or conformant, because if you don't and your developers or your SRE team is on, the internet, oh, cool, new app that I found on Hacker News this morning, I'm going to roll this thing out and see if it works. If you don't have a conformant cluster, it's not going to happen. You're going to have a really bad time.
Ken, what do you think about the CKA exam? Would you take it? Would you? And we could roll this into the lab. I see you in the chat talking about labs as well. Learning resources.
Yeah, I mean, having any sort of certification early in the game is an excellent choice, no matter what. So I think in terms of setting up the framework and the knowledge that you need in order to get off to a good start, absolutely 100%. CKA is a great way to pursue that. I haven't done it myself, but I'm the meat in the middle management sandwich there. I don't know what it is. So,
here, let's look at the lab.
Other pieces to go with that are the hands-on labs for sure. The HOLs that I've linked to, there are a couple of them. There's the Modern Apps Ninja site, and there's the direct link to the vSphere Tanzu lab on there as well. Just in terms of getting some hands-on, it's super easy to get started with this. If you have a vSphere environment, Mike actually wrote a getting started guide that we can link to there as well. And you can set up your own environment and play around with it fairly easily as long as you have the prerequisites that he outlines in place. But there's nothing magic about running a container. There's nothing magic about orchestrating some container work, but I think you do need to have some sort of framework that you can play with in order to get that level of knowledge. So CK is great. HOL is great. The other thing I'd like to point out is that we have a certification as well. If you are a VCP DCV, a VMware Certified Professional Data Center then you are qualified.
Are you a V? I'm a V.
Take an install and configure course, instructor-led training, as well as online training for vSphere with Tanzu. And you can get a specialist level badge certification above and beyond your VCP DCV that will qualify you as a vSphere Tanzu specialist. So there are a few ways to pursue accreditation, but the accreditation in and of itself, I think, is, as always, an interesting way to differentiate yourself on your career path. And showing at this point, it's a very good, it's a good thing to have at this point, given that there aren't a lot of people with accreditations of any sort out there. But the hands-on, whether it's in lab or on your own environment, I think that's the most important way forward.
Yeah, hands-on labs
have done a lot of really good work on that too. At the tail end of Mike's getting started guide, there's a link to what Miles has put out there in terms of sample applications. Just to get comfortable with this stuff.
So what Ken was trying to say before his audio cut out is at the tail end of the getting started guide. What's that?
Oh no, I said Ken, you're coming in. Yeah, the tail end of the getting started guide. I wanted to talk about that. So
at the tail end of that is a guide that Miles wrote that picks up where the getting started guide leaves off and allows you to just, if you follow the getting started guide and then go right into Miles's part, it's really seamless. I am literally doing it in the background right now.
Cool.
Yeah, and there's something else I'd like to add as well that isn't at the end of that guide. Like, that guide is a good proof of life primer of, hey, look, it's Kubernetes and it works, right? But on the whole, that's not interesting. Like, if you're just getting started with the Kubernetes for the first time, you're going to get it set up and you're going to be like, great. Now what?
Yeah.
Now what, right? So I dropped another link in chat there for something called TKG Lab from the Tanzu Solutions engineering team. It's on GitHub. And that is like an end-to-end guide workflow on setting up a whole bunch of different applications and systems on top of a Tanzu cluster that let you do stuff like OpenID, authentication, monitor it with Prometheus and Grafana, a whole bunch of stuff that's actually useful things that you can try out.
Oh, that's really cool, dude.
Yeah,
because that's the thing, the now what sort of thing. I have been in that situation. I don't know how many times in my life. Now what? Like, it looks like it works, but how can I tell? Like that sort of thing. So, Let's talk a little bit about the getting started guide, Mike. I wanted to get to. I wanted to ask you about that. That's something that you had written up to get started, right? You know, like did you put that? We've got the links to that, and that's out on core.vmware.com.
Yep.
The technical marketing site repository of a lot of our information. Mike, would you? Probably can't walk through the whole getting started guide here, but what are the big things if I'm getting started, if I'm going to try this stuff in my lab about 20 feet that direction, what are considerations I would need to make here?
Yeah.
What are the big things?
So I think probably the biggest takeaway that I can encourage people is doing your homework. This isn't something that you download, go click, 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 click. Yay, I'm running Doom, or whatever the case might be. Right? It's not a. If all the ducks are aligned, it does go very seamlessly, but you got to get all those ducks aligned. And what I mean by that is you need to make sure your networking is configured appropriately, and your storage and a number of other bits. If you think about this, you're installing Kubernetes. If you go to a cloud vendor and say, I want to run containers and have a Kubernetes interface, they've done all of the setup that it takes to build a cloud. What the guide is essentially showing you is all that background work that needs to go in before you get your Kubernetes dial tone, for lack of a better term.
Yep.
Right?
Okay, that makes a lot of sense. Yeah.
So yeah, running kubectl is one thing. Building the cloud-like environment to run kubectl is another thing. So I'd say probably the thing that folks run into the most with challenges is network configurations.
Okay.
And the guide goes into detail around that for using HA proxy. That's what it was originally written for. We now have the NSX Advanced Load Balancer, formerly Avi. That will get incorporated at some point. And then there's also the NSX-based, which we would encourage you to probably look towards a VCF-based solution for that, because that gets rolled out, and that does a lot more automation at a network level.
Cool. Very cool. The networking has always been hard. The networking concepts are generally foreign to a lot of sysadmins and things like that, and so making it easier. You mentioned the load balancer. That's part of vSphere. That's part of vSphere with Tanzu now, right?
Yes. You have the option of either using HA proxy or the company we purchased a while back called Avi Networks. That has now been renamed NSX Advanced Load Balancer, or ALB.
Ah, cool.
And both of those come with the vSphere with Tanzu license. One thing I'd like to point out is if you want to try this in a home lab environment or in a work lab environment, you don't need licenses to try this for 60 days.
Oh, that's a really good
point. You can install the same way you would install ESX and vCenter and use your 60-day trial license. When you go in to configure your namespace, your workload control plane stuff, workload management, there is a 60-day license that starts when you start that configuration process.
Ah, cool. That's really cool. That's a very powerful thing. I know eval licenses and that are great for home labs. The vMug Advantage stuff too, that's great for home labs and even work test environments. We used to use that. Oh, Ken has dropped out. We will miss you, Ken. It sounded like he was having bandwidth issues anyhow. But yeah, here he's back. Ken, excited to see you back. And your audio is still pretty soft, man. But the we were just talking about vmug advantage. Vmug advantage is a great thing. We used to use that for our work labs as well, and being able to prototype things and whatnot. So a couple other questions. If you've got questions, we've got about 10 minutes left scheduled here. If you've got questions, put them out in the chat. We've got some agreement from Tim with you, Mike, that home networking was the biggest hurdle in the home lab. And so getting that figured out, yeah, that sounds familiar. You know,
it was my biggest hurdle in writing the guide.
Yeah, we've got to do all this stuff ourselves in order to write the guides on how to do it. And it's like,
right.
We feel your pain.
Good thing is, though, like we felt that, you know, ourselves, and we know, and we gave the feedback to the teams. And, you know, it is an area that's getting a lot of attention right now, is the networking, simplifying things, making it easier to get kick-started with.
Okay, let's see what else.
Yeah, I agree there with Miles. Our experience, literally Miles and I and Michael West's experiences with setup and configuration and the writing of the guide and everything else has directly fed back into the engineering teams, and the results will be there at some point.
Ken, you look like you were going to say something.
No, never. No, I'm just...
Your color commentary. Let's hear it.
Well, I was actually just trying to manage some of the commentary and get some of the links that Miles was posting over into the YouTube channel comments there. So I've...
If you're not seeing the links, yeah, that's a good point. If you're not seeing the links, we're trying to figure out where they're going here.
I added a boatload of links over on the YouTube side.
Are they in the chat on the YouTube side?
Okay. Yeah. In the chat on the YouTube.
Okay. Mike. Sorry if you're watching via Facebook or Periscope, you're going to have to go over to the YouTube side of things. This is a new platform, and at the beginning, I promised that it might not be perfect. Well, I'm delivering on that promise. No, sorry, but
we see a security question in there.
We see a security question in here
from Sai.
Is there any native DevSecOps production solution for security and custom policy stuff? Open policy agent around Tanzu. Actually, Miles is nodding. I think I know the answer, but I think Miles probably has a better take on it. Go ahead, man.
So the open policy agent stuff is really interesting, and that's we are looking into that very closely at the moment. And the whole Tanzu portfolio, there's a lot of work going on at the moment around how do we deliver a secure end-to-end pipeline or supply chain, we call it, for your software, where it goes from code, it gets signed, it goes into containers, they get signed, everything is verified at every level. So we are doing a lot of work around that. Like, for example, the open source project, Crossplane, it's called, in combination with the Open Service Broker API and Open Policy Agent are, something that we're evaluating and looking at very, very closely. So today we don't have anything product that you can buy. There are ways you can do it yourself, obviously, with open source software. But I would definitely say just watch this space. That is something that we're investigating very, very closely.
This stuff is quite the moving target, though. I mean, you were mentioning earlier that, this stuff is evolving really rapidly. And I was thinking, because it's a cloud native computing foundation that sponsors a lot of this stuff. Didn't they just actually vote to back down from 4 releases to 3 a year to slow it down just a little bit? Yeah, that'll be cool too. Sometimes it's too fast, and too much churn hurts. So, Miles, you had mentioned we've talked a little bit about the VM operator. I had on my list here things to talk about, and I wanted to get back to the VM operator because that seems like, to me, in my old school I heart VMs sort of mentality, that seems like an unholy mixing and matching of new and old there. Tell me I'm wrong. Tell me why I'm wrong.
Okay, so you're wrong. Your wish has been fulfilled.
You are wrong.
You are wrong. That's it.
Well, let's wrap this up.
No, but I mean, the way to look at this is there are a lot of applications and a lot of companies out there that have not built everything from scratch, from the ground up, greenfield on containers, right? That's just reality. I mean, there's banks and everything still running mainframes, and they will continue to run mainframes, and they will continue to run VMs, and they will, everything is going to work together. So by adding this VM operator, and we call it VM service in the product itself, it gives you an API, again, through the supervisor cluster that lets you deploy VMs, but in a declarative Kubernetes fashion. So imagine you've got this application and it is a Tomcat server and it runs in a VM. You've got an OVA template already pre-built, all the bits inside of it, everything, that's your golden image. The idea is if you're modernizing your applications and modernizing your infrastructure and you're adding, some containers in here and using Kubernetes, you don't just have to throw that outside, out or, not use it again, but you also don't have to manage it as a separate silo. You should be able to manage it alongside the rest of your modern app. And that is the idea. So whenever you create one of these VM objects inside of Kubernetes, it creates an object from the OVA you specify, gets a NIC from whatever network you specify, gives it the appropriate storage, all the usual things you do whenever you spin up a VM. And the idea is that if you're using CD pipelines to deploy your modern app, why not just make the VM part of that CD pipeline as well? Why does it have to be discrete? Why does it have to be different? And that's kind of the point is if you have existing workloads that run in VMs, bring them along for the ride. Manage them the same way you manage your modern apps.
That's really cool.
You can orchestrate containers and VMs using the same functionality and the same models. So if your service happens to span different delivery mechanisms, you can actually orchestrate the whole thing as a unit, basically. Nice.
Yep, exactly.
Cool. Here we got a question about VM service. Do VMs deployed via VM service, can they be managed outside it like a VM created in a traditional way?
Yeah, so you can manage them and you can back them up actually just like regular VMs. So whatever backup solution you use for VMs will work for VM service created VMs as well. At the end of the day, they're a VM. It's the same object. You can and can't have some control over certain aspects of it. So for example, it just shows up in your vCenter inventory like any other object, only it's underneath a namespace, a vSphere with Tanzu namespace. But, there are some stuff that, these VMs are managed by developers. They're managed by the platform team that's operating Kubernetes. And if there's something wrong with that, they should be the ones to fix it. So it is a little locked down. For example, you can't edit how many CPUs or RAM or whatever it's got. The idea is you're supposed to, right there it is.
Yeah.
You can open it up and have a look at it, but you can't change the stuff. And the reason is we expect you to use the namespaces feature to set your policies around how much compute, storage, and whatnot gets allocated to these things. And your developers should be the ones managing that. If it's not performing well, it's their problem to fix. And frankly, you should be happy that it's their problem to fix. It's one less ticket in your queue.
Yeah, that's actually a huge thing here is that, and it's kind of a foreign concept to a lot of organizations that have been doing things the same way for many decades. Like it's not this idea of DevOps, the ops part going to the developers that, both giving them the responsibility and the authority to do stuff for their applications, but the guardrails around it. And that guardrail, thinking about those guardrails, that's the namespace, right? Like we really haven't talked about namespaces. What are namespaces then?
I like to think of them as, from a VI admin standpoint, as resource pools on steroids.
That's cool.
Right? So I can take a resource pool, and they do show up as a resource pool within vCenter. And now I can apply permissions within there. So I can assign any one of you different roles within that resource pool without having to assign you a vCenter account.
Interesting.
Right? And then I can say this resource pool is going to have X number of vCPUs, X amount of memory, and it's limited to this type of storage.
Cool.
So is that
so now here, developer, here is your sandbox. Go play. You can create as much as you want within that resource pool, but if you start running into a head wall, it's because it's a resource pool.
Ken, you were going to say something.
Well, I was just wondering, is the intent more that you're going to then contain an application set within this, or a particular type of infrastructure deployment that you're looking at, or is it really a full sandbox for an end-to-end, virtualized nested data center sort of a thing? How are people using this in practice in terms of the way they're deploying systems into their namespaces? Is that, to my understanding, this is basically a subset of the vSphere infrastructure. So you can define that namespace to whatever criteria you want. And would people traditionally build a namespace per application set? Would people traditionally build an application for an entire department? Like, how would you see that unfolding from an application dev perspective?
This is the thing about meta objects, right? They could be whatever you want them to be. And again, it gets kind of religious, but people divide them in different ways. You know, I've seen customers that do a namespace per app where, you know, the namespace is just a bag of stuff that makes up the app, Kubernetes cluster, VMs, what have you, vSphere pods, whatever. But I've also seen customers, and it is actually more common of a model where they have a namespace per project instead. And then they have multiple teams assigned to that namespace. And then there will be multiple TKG clusters inside of that. Each team gets their own TKG cluster, but all of the project's resources live inside that namespace. And to me, that's a little bit more logical than just a single app. You know, having a whole project, doing it by department, you know, you can't really allocate resources to a department. To me, that's kind of ineffective. But you know, allocating resources to a project where you can see return on investment, that kind of stuff, to me, that makes more sense. And that's generally the more common model.
And it's pretty cool because it goes back to what Mike's saying about resource pools on steroids. From a VI admin perspective, from that infrastructure administrator perspective, you're just saying, here's a chunk, do with it what you see fit.
It's almost like
and because it's a resource pool, you already you as a vSphere admin already understand that, look, Miles could peg all the CPUs within his resource pool, but he's not going to take away from Bob's resource pool. And that is a real big differentiator.
And I appreciate that because, you know, the noisy neighbor problem is definitely an issue in virtualized environments, overcommitted environments, things like that. Hey, we've got some questions out here. There's one, it's not really a Kubernetes one. What do you think about the critical vulnerability in vCenter? We have guidance on this. Go out to our blog, blogs.vmware.com/vSphere, and you will find what we think about it. I think you should patch.
Our guidance is patch.
Patch if you can.
Stop with the workarounds. Patch.
Workarounds are the easiest and fastest way, especially given ransomware and all that stuff, is to patch. Just get rid of it. If you can't patch, there's a workaround, but it's got there are nuances to it. A lot of VMSAs, a lot of security advisories are very straightforward. This one's got some nuance to it, so it's worth reading through the material on it. And there's a forum out there in the VMware Communities forum. If you've got questions, you can call GSS for support on it as well. So lots of resources.
The patch is non-intrusive as well, right? I mean, it's not like it's requiring you to reboot your entire infrastructure.
It doesn't actually. Well, it depends on where you're coming from and where there's you know, all of our customers have varying states of deployments and things, and so there is a fair amount of nuance. If you're coming a long way to get that patch, then you might have to reboot. If you're just applying it from update 2 to now, you may not have to reboot.
But if you're upgrading from 4.1 for security issues, then you've got bigger issues afoot than security.
Hey, I know of a couple of customers there's a couple of folks that I know that are running 4.1 clusters, mostly as pets at this point, just to see how long they can be up. There's one that's been up, I think it's been about 3,300 days now, which is both terrifying and awesome, that the uptime. But
that's anyway. Longer than many pets live. I mean,
that's true. Yeah, sad but true.
Here, we'll deal with some other questions here. If you've got some questions, we're going to try to wrap this up pretty quick. So if you've got anything that's bugging you, put it out here now, and then we'll conclude in a few minutes. If we're testing this feature in our infrastructure, do we need some additional licenses? How is this thing licensed? There's an
when you enable workload management, the clock starts at 60 days
for the eval license, right?
If you want to continue that, apply a vSphere standard or above license.
Okay, cool. And we've got another one about namespaces. Trouble with understanding how networking can be customized, like making different namespaces and separated IP networks. So do namespaces apply to the networks then as well?
They can if you want them to. So generally, a lot of customers just go single network for all of their namespaces, single workload network. It's by far the simplest. And unless you have some kind of really good reason, I don't see why you would want more. You know, maybe you do need separate networks for PCI, whatever, right? It makes sense then. So yes, it can be done. Whenever you set up workload management to begin with, it says, what workload networks would you like to add, right? And you elect one that is your primary, but you can add up to, I think it's like 14 others, 15 total.
Yeah.
Oh, wow.
And like, so more than you would really ever want to deal with. And you just put in the IP ranges. And then whenever you're creating your namespaces, you just click the drop down for the network and you say, what network do you want this to be a part of? Boom. All the resources deployed into that are deployed into that network.
That's really slick.
Yep.
Just remember that the more you add, the more complexity you bring upon yourself.
Yes.
Well, it sounds like the comment here is that some of the complexity is maybe not chosen, but mandated by various regulatory environments.
But
Cough,
also just
security team, cough.
Yeah,
just
security
because
team, compliance team.
Yeah, just because you can doesn't mean you should. Just because you
I
can
bet
add
you to
multiple
say
networks.
that this entire thing.
Yeah.
Cool. Well, let's wrap this up. And let's go counterclockwise again here. Let's start with Mike because Ken, his disconnection and reconnection here stirred it all up. So we'll go counterclockwise again. Mike, in closing, what would you like people to understand about all of this newfangled modern app stuff in Tanzu and whatnot?
Don't be scared of it. It's a new opportunity to learn new stuff. And learning new stuff as a vSphere admin is always a good thing. And if you don't learn it and don't use it, and somebody else builds a Kubernetes-based environment, and you're not able to be part of that, not a good place to be.
So there's a career aspect.
You can offer Kubernetes services on a platform that has already passed PCI, HIPAA, other compliance environments. You've already worked out backups. You've already worked out networking. You've already worked out all of these things. Why do you want to start from ground zero? Or even worse, have a developer team say, hey, we built this, now go manage it.
Yeah.
Nah.
Good points. Ken, what do you think about all of this?
Very similar to Mike. This is new, but it's not that new. I think the new part of this that's kind of interesting is how it's blending roles. So developers are writing code. They've always written code. They've always deployed code. There's nothing particularly new about that. Maybe throwing it through an orchestration layer might be relatively new in the last 5 years from a container orchestration layer. They don't care what the infrastructure is. On the infrastructure side, we don't care what the application is. And this is what's melding these two things together. That's the kind of new and interesting part here, but it's an easy, non-terrifying thing when you're using something like vSphere or Tanzu to host all of that stuff. Because now, back to the point, as a VI admin, you've just got a set of resources that you are allocating directly to developers. And from a developer perspective, they're gaining the benefits of the platform without having to do anything. They don't have to change the way they write their code. So everyone kind of benefits from this model. It's new in terms of that intersection, but I never know whether to use transparent or opaque. It's both at the same time.
Translucent.
Semi-translucent.
Well, comparative advantage, I think, is what's going through my mind. Like use the different teams to their advantage.
Precisely. This streamlines everything for everyone, and it, to Mike's point, makes the platform more or less not a barrier, I guess is the best way to put it. So,
yeah, you're for example, your developers don't need to know the vSphere SOAP APIs.
Right.
They just declare, I need an ingress network in their YAML file, and vSphere with Tanzu solves that for them.
Likewise, the VI admin doesn't need to know Golang, so everyone wins.
Cool. Everyone wins.
Well, Miles, how does everyone win? Take us out here. Like, what do you think?
So I think Mike really nailed it with the first thing that he said is this is not something to be scared of. This is super exciting. This is a real opportunity, not just for you to develop new apps, but for your career and everything. Like this is the new IaaS. It's going to be the next thing. And there's enough wood behind this arrow, to use a very overused cliche there, that, you know, it's got input from everybody, all the big players in the industry. That this is a safe bet at this stage. And if you just go out there and look at some of the examples and some of the demos that people have built, like over the last couple of years, there have been so many light bulbs go on in my head that just you go, aha, I understand, right? I get it. This makes total sense. And, you know, just start yourself off on that journey as well. Spin up vSphere with Tanzu in a lab, try it out, go through the quick start guide that Mike wrote, go through the TKG lab that I linked to earlier on, spin up some applications on Kubernetes. And honestly, that's all it takes. Once you deploy your first application, you'll get that aha moment and that light bulb that goes off that just says, this is the next big thing. This is the way to do things. And I think it's something that you should be excited about and something that you should be actively looking to progress if you want your career to go in that direction and grow beyond where you are currently.
Excellent way to
Bob,
put that.
What wood can you put behind that arrow?
I'm not going to add anything. You guys are perfect. And and yeah, I don't know if it's just the live stream or what, but no, this has been great. And I really appreciate all the people that have joined us here too. Some great questions. We're going to schedule another. So let's see. Can you provide those links again in the Reddit thread? I think the links.
Yes.
Where were we putting the links? In the Reddit thread, or were we putting them in the?
I put them in YouTube, but I will add them to the Reddit thread in a moment.
Yeah,
okay,
put
very
them
cool.
in YouTube as well.
Yeah, we can do that. Developers, operators all together with vSphere with Tanzu. Yeah, that's a great way to put it out in the comments too. Thank you very much, everyone. We're going to do another one of these next month. And it's June already, almost June. So last week in June, keep an eye out for one of these vSphere lives. I don't know the topic yet. We might talk about security again. We might talk about some, who knows? But subscribe to our YouTube channel, and you'll be informed there. Thank you if you're viewing us on Facebook and on the Periscope and Twitter side of things. That's new for us, and I'm glad it's working out. So, again, thank you. We appreciate you all very much. Thanks for being our customers, and take good care of yourselves.
Thanks, everyone. Bye.
Thanks, everyone.